Hello everyone, I just finished painting way too many Skaven for Age of Sigmar, and I have a ton of projects waiting for me in my pile of potential, but I need a bit of a palette cleanser. I think it's finally time that I paint some Battletech. But I'm gonna do it wrong. Battletech is a game that I have always loved, but from afar. As a kid, I was super into video games. The first one I played was MechWarrior 3050 on the Super Nintendo. This was like a super weird, janky clone of Desert Strike, if you ever played that one with the helicopter. The Gauss rifle was a cluster bomb. It was fun, but really goofy. Wait, is that a flying marauder?
Make it make sense.
The game that really had me fall in love with the Battletech universe was MechWarrior 2. Though they look dated by today's standards, I fell in love with the cinematics. The simulation-style gameplay had you really feel like you're piloting a 75-ton death machine. Just watching this, the nostalgia hits so hard right now.
Degrees. Local time is 22:46:27 GST. All systems nominal.
Oh my God!
Look at those wireframes.
Hell yeah, brother.
I played both the Clan Wolf and Jade Falcon campaigns, and moved on to Mercenaries and Ghost Bear's Legacy. After what felt like ages, finally MechWarrior 3 came out. And it was awesome, but there was only one mission pack called Pirate's Moon. Luckily, we didn't have to wait that long for MechWarrior 4. There was a huge step up in graphical quality. Hardware had just gotten way better during this time. The music and sound design was way more immersive. It really made you feel like you were living in the Battletech universe. In 2002, we got MechWarrior 4 Mercenaries, which was our last taste of a story-driven Battletech game for a while. Now for video games, I've always been more of a single-player campaign player, which really sucked because I then had to wait 17 years before the next MechWarrior game. I was gone so far from the series that I raised 2 children nearly to adulthood in the time between games. While it was light on the story, MechWarrior 5 delivered in making you feel like you were running your own mercenary company in the Battletech universe. This game really lit a spark in me. My love for big stompy robots was back with a vengeance. So I was thrilled to find out that I had missed a Battletech game. In 2018, Harebrained Schemes released a turn-based Battletech game. I found out about it, found out it was good, and dove in with both feet. And it was glorious. The art style was amazing. It was both strategically and tactically deep. Not only do you have to react to enemies' positions in the moment while you're down on a planet, but you also have to manage running a mercenary company, dealing with random events that happen, taking advantage of opportunity, and just seeing that huge payoff when a big mission goes your way, or that last bit of salvage drops for that mech that you've been looking for. And the turn-based style of gameplay had me wondering what I was missing with the tabletop game. When I was a kid, the Battletech game intimidated me. The hex grids, the super crunchy rules, and the fact that everyone I saw playing it seemed much older than me, that led to me keeping out of the Battletech club. But now I want in. So I did what I usually do, which is buy way too much stuff. I am never one to half-ass anything. Always use your whole ass.
Phrasing?
I figured the best way to start would be with the beginner box. Makes sense, right? This set comes with 2 battle mechs to start with, both Inner Sphere. You have the Wolverine and the Griffin. I figured that while my daughter and I learned to play, we would each take one of these mechs. These look pretty great. They're a lot better than the old metal mechs I remember. But I hate playing with gray plastic. I'm going to need to paint these. But how do I pick a color scheme? A quick Google search took me to Camo Specs Online and the Unit Color Compendium. Both of these are amazing resources for looking up hundreds of lore-accurate color schemes. There are so many amazing color schemes on these websites. So what do I do? Someone with horribly crippling choice paralysis. I want to paint like all of these. But what about the lore? What if I make the wrong decision? Which Battletech faction best represents me as a person?
Are we the baddies?
Alright, another quick Google search. How to pick a color scheme. Alright, this person also bought the starter box and is pretty much in the same situation that I'm in. What say you, Battletech community? How bad can I screw this up? How to paint your mechs however you want. Colors don't matter in Battletech, nor does unit composition after a certain period. Go nuts, dude. You can paint them any color you want. Well, how can I eliminate the stress of choosing? I got an idea. Maybe I'll let the dice gods choose for me. Enter the color cubes. These gorgeous Rubik's Cube looking boxes are full of color schemes. Each of these cards has a unique number on it, and every card has a unique color scheme along with the hex codes for those colors on the back. I bought these because I really wanted something to give me inspiration. So these cubes, which I got both volumes, are made by Sarah Renae Clark, and this is not a paid advertisement, it's just something that I really wanted. I paid full price for these and I do not regret my purchase. The cardstock is super high quality and I really enjoyed just like rifling through these, looking at all the different color possibilities. But the numbers on the corner gave me an idea. How about I use a random number generator and let it pick the color scheme for me? What could possibly go wrong? In this next section, you can see my actual generation of the numbers, so you can see there's no shenanigans. Alright, so first up, the Wolverine. Alright, so we have a random number generator here, open. Let's go ahead and we're doing number 1 first, so Color Cube Volume 1. So this guy's got the numbers 1 through 250. Let's go ahead and generate and see what we get. 107. Just gonna pull out of the middle here somewhere. Let's see. That's 50 something. 107. 105, 106. Ah, 107. Interesting. It's kind of a cool color palette. Gray, platinum, blood orange, burgundy, and black. All right, so mech number 1, we have 107. So it looks like the gray is like dominant color. We have these other reddish tones in here as well, along with some black. I think I can work with this. Next up, we generate our color scheme for the Griffin. All right, we got our random number generator ready to go. We're gonna make our color scheme for mech number 2. We're gonna be using Color Cube Volume 2 here. So this time around, we need a number between 250 and 500. So let's go ahead and generate that and see what we get. 381, 381. Let's see what we get with 381. And it's cupcakes. All right. Interesting. So like I can kind of see this as like 3 different sections of color. We have this like orangey brown here. We've got this nice teal, and then we got this pink. It looks like pink is the accent color. Oh, I could work with this. Yeah, 381. All right. Light pink, seafoam, mint gray, caramel, and burnt sienna. So mech number 2 is going to be card 381. All right, so the Wolverine I decided to do completely with my brush. No airbrush involved. I decided to use mostly Pro Acryl from Monument Hobbies for this. Let's see what I have in my collection. For the black, the obvious choice is coal black. For the burgundy, the closest choice I have is mahogany. The burgundy by Monument Hobby doesn't actually quite match the card as closely as this mahogany does. For the blood orange, the choice is orange red, which is a signature series from Rogue Hobbies. She has a bright and whimsical painting style and a fun personality. Check her out if you hadn't already. This seems like a perfect match for the blood orange color on our palette. Now I'm not just going to be painting flat color. You'll notice on here that there's multiple levels of shade. And I feel like this burnt red would be a very good shade for the blood orange. Take a look here and see how close that matches. Now the gray and the platinum are actually like a blended color. You can see as the color changes as it goes across the background of the photo. My closest approximation to this would be bright warm gray for the platinum and neutral gray for the gray. So here we have our color palette. I may add other colors as needed, but it's going to be working within this scheme, using both the pure colors and the photo itself for inspiration. My first step, I decided to base coat the legs in dark warm gray. I'm really excited to paint my first battle mech. Did this in one nice thin coat. I figured I did not need complete coverage on this because I'm going to be going over with subsequent highlights and dry brushing. That being said, Pro Acrylic paints cover very well. I finished painting the legs and I decided to do the arms as well. I also did the hips and part way up the back. On the color card, this was the dominant color. Next, I applied a highlight using some dry brush stippling. I used my medium-sized dry brush for this, and I went with warm gray as the highlight color. I applied this all over the gray areas in kind of a half stippling, half dry brushing motion. I focused on where the light would hit, and I left the darker colors in the shadows. Then I added my light warm gray for my platinum color from the palette. Then I continued to stipple highlight the miniature. I kept going until I was happy with the gradient. I didn't worry about going into other areas because that's all going to get painted over later. I decided to punch up the highlights by adding a bit of bold titanium white to the mix. True to its name, this is an extremely bold, bright color and I never use it on its own. It's always in a mix with other colors. Next up, I used the same mix of colors, but this time with a regular brush. The dry brushing did a good job of establishing a nice gradient, but now I'm going to go in and place very deliberate highlights on raised surfaces and edges. I took my time with this step, making sure that I'm placing all the highlights where I want them. For those of you that have painted Warhammer 40,000, it's kind of like highlighting a Space Marine. Which is to say, to do it right, it takes a long time. Now when edge highlighting things that are in the shadows, I make sure to go to a darker tone. So I'm still brighter than the area that I'm highlighting, but I'm much darker than my upper color. With patience and perseverance, I now have it where I want it. Keep in mind it will be darkened down later with an oil wash. Next up, I'll be moving on to the reds. I decided to use a blend of burnt red, orange red, and mahogany. For the base coat, I set up my palette with mahogany and burnt red, using mahogany as the base. Always thin your paints. I decided to use the reds for this color scheme on the shoulders, the upper torso, and on the missile pod. This will be a nice base to work from for the burgundy and the blood orange sections of the model. Base coating is never fun, but always necessary. Well, you might think it's fun. Let me know in the comments. Any of you guys like base coating? I mean, it's the reason I bought an airbrush. So I decided to split the reds between the blood orange and the burgundy sections on the model. So the shoulder pads and the missile pods will be the brighter color, and the torso will be the more muted red. But first, I needed to establish a mid-tone. This is a mix of the mahogany and the blood orange. Now, red can be a tricky color to highlight. You can't just add white to it because then you end up with pink. Your highlights, you kind of have to go to a brighter red, or you have to go into the more orange side of the spectrum. When you're working with blues and greens, it's much easier. You can just add a bit of white to it and you just lighten up that tone. To differentiate and set apart the shoulder pad and the missile launchers on this guy, I decided to add in some more orange into the spectrum to get closer to that tone. For this, the most obvious paint to use was orange. I slowly blended this bit by bit, adding it into the blood orange color to increase my highlights. I'm trying as a rule to push one level of highlight further than I think I need. I used to have a tendency to under-highlight everything. Slowly but surely, building up the highlights with different color tones, I differentiated between the two parts of the red. Alright, so the orange is looking pretty good, but I think I want to add a little bit more depth to the darker red. I'm going to add a touch of my favorite red ever made, Bold Pyral Red from Pro Acrylic. This stuff is really potent, so I added just a bit of the mid-tone color to tone down the highlight. Now, although this was the first Battletech miniature I've ever painted, it did bring me memories of like painting Tau battlesuits, Space Marine tanks. The muscle memory was all there. I guess you could slap chop this, which is kind of a way of dry brushing to kind of pre-shade and then painting over with speed paints. But I find that that technique tends to work better on heavily textured surfaces like fur and cloaks and skin. To me, it just doesn't look right when you have large flat panels. I think for me, edge highlighting is the way to go. Now I think I'm pretty satisfied with the two different tones of red. Let's see how we match up against the card. Alright, the blood orange is looking pretty close, and the burgundy as well. I think it's an even closer match when you look at the things in the photo itself. In particular, the almonds and the strawberries. We really haven't used the black yet. We gotta get some black on this model. I figured I'll paint his autocannon in black and then also the upper parts of his leg. This has got some texture on it. Let's try slap chopping it, using some contrast black legion. Let's go straight out of the pot like it's 1988. Straight from the pot, it's still strong enough that it reads as black, but it's preserving the highlights I did underneath. Alright, maybe I should try and slap chop an entire battle mech. Get in here and paint the autocannon. Now the barrel and the magazine I'm going to just paint in silver anyways, so I'm not really worried about getting any black on that. For painting the metals, I decided to use one of my favorite metal paints, Vallejo Metal Color Aluminum. I painted metallic bits on his autocannon. I also decided to paint the piping on his torso, the cockpit mounted laser, and the vents on his back. Also, I decided to paint silver the joints on his limbs. Alright, he's looking pretty clean. I need to work on the base and the cockpit. For the base, I decided to use some old Citadel Grelin Badlands texture that I had lying around. I just kind of mushed this all over the base, making sure that I wasn't getting any on his feet. For some color variety, I decided to use some Vallejo Earth texture as well. I just kind of mushed it in there. You have a lot of working time with this, so I just kind of played with it until I was happy with the result. Once the base had some time to dry, it was time to work on the cockpit. Now this is where the palette I felt was way too limiting. I wanted to do something that contrasted with the palette. Depending upon your color wheel, the contrasting color for red is either green or cyan. I figured cyan would be a nice contrasting pop of color. For this I'll be using dark jade, jade, bright jade, and bright pale green. I'll be painting the cockpit glass the way that I paint gemstones, so I'm going to be working from black. First I'm painting the entire cockpit black. I'll be working from black through the darker jade tones all the way to the lighter jade tones, and setting up my palette for blending. This lets me establish a smooth gradient from one color to the next. Right at this point, I encountered a problem. My camera overheated. I lost most of the footage of my painting this step. Really frustrating. Looking for a new camera. Here is the aftermath and what I was able to salvage of the footage. I used a stipple blending technique with heavily diluted paint in little tiny dots. I start out with kind of bands of paint, and then I blend out the transitions with midtones between the two colors. Anyway, here's the end result. I think it looks pretty good. I like the contrasting cyan. Now I just gotta go back in and repaint the cockpit struts. Gotta be real careful now not to mess up my hard work. This part really stresses me out. More concerned here with not screwing up than how it shows up on camera. End result though? Yep, that's a cockpit. In Battletech, a lot of people mark the front facing of their mech. It's a super important thing to keep track of in the game. Facing really matters. So I decided to use the same color blend to mark the front facing of my mech. Because I'm committed to not using an airbrush for this mech, this took a long time and a lot of blending. After ages of pushing pigments back and forth, I was finally happy with the end result. I ended up with like a laser-like glow marking the front facing for my mech. The last stage is going to be the oil wash, but first I have to put down a layer of gloss varnish. For this step I will be using my airbrush. This is almost like hitting the save button on your paint job. You can always remove the oil wash back to this original state. And the gloss varnish also helps with the capillary action of the wash. I'm hoping this works really well for panel lining the Battle Mech. Alright, the gloss is all dry and we're ready to wash. I use these little condiment cups for my wash mixing, and to dilute the oil paint we use mineral spirits. I keep my cutting mat down here just to protect my work surface. Mineral spirits actually chews up these mouse mats that I use. After losing one of my favorite mouse mats this way, I've been very protective ever since. For the mix of the oil wash, I usually just kind of eyeball it. If you want a darker wash, go with less mineral spirits. If you want a nice and thin one, go with more. You can always adjust this later. I mix it up really thoroughly and just kind of test the consistency on the side of the cup. Then I kind of slather it on generously because this is a reductive sort of painting. You're going to put this on and then you're going to remove it later after it's mostly dry. Work my way from top to bottom and I make sure that I get all of it into the crevices. This is so much easier than using like a normal acrylic wash because you can remove it so easily. Basically the miniature version of we'll fix it in post. I also put it all over the base to make sure that everything gets shaded down there as well. I use my brush to wick away any major pooling in places that I don't want it. But if I miss anything, it's easy enough to fix. Alright, about an hour and a half later, he's all dry and ready for cleanup. I'm using a dry makeup sponge here and I'm just going to start wiping away from the raised areas on the model. Our highlights and our brighter colors are going to pop back in. I don't have to worry about wiping off any of the previous layers because I did that gloss varnish in between. You can do this without the varnish, you just have to be really careful that you don't rub off the previous layers with too much force. My very last step, I add a little bit of mineral spirits to the makeup sponge. This lets me really brighten up the raised areas of the model. All that bright color pops back in, but it still leaves the darkness in the recesses. I also use this on the base just to clean up the upper levels and add some highlights back in. And here we are, mech number 1, the Wolverine, is done. If this was your mech, what faction would you pick for it? House Steiner? House Liao? Let me know in the comments. Alright, so we painted Fruit Bowl, but what are we going to do with Cupcake here? And yes, my daughter has claimed this one. She is officially calling this battle mech Cupcake. So I picked out some colors that I think best represent this color scheme. Since this is a very pastel color scheme, I decided to go with Warpaint's Fanatic. For the pink, I chose Pink Potion, which I think is a pretty close color match. These Warpaints cover amazingly, but it's also because a lot of them are desaturated and have a lot of white mixed in. For the light blue, I decided to go with Neptune Glow. I painted color swatches on the top of my bottles, and you can see the dried paint matches the card quite closely. For the turquoise, I had to go back to Pro Acryl. I did not find a very good color match in the Warpaints range, and I had even more trouble matching the browns. You can see light umber here is just a little off. The next closest match I found was Dark Warm Flesh from Pro Acryl. But again, not quite the same shade. Now call me crazy, but I found folk art matte paints in my collection that I bought for making terrain were actually a closer match to these colors. Do I dare using such a low quality paint on a mini? Is this blasphemy? Heresy? Well, I did say I was going to paint Battletech wrong. Side note, a really cool thing about Warpaint's Fanatics is they come in these color triads. I mean, they call them triads, but there's actually 6 shades of them. So I grabbed a couple that were in the pink spectrum. It'll give me a nice shade and highlight color. I did the same with the blue colors. And I grabbed some shade and highlight colors for the jade too. Alright, I have my mini all primed. And I'm feeling totally out of my mind. Am I really going to airbrush with folk art craft paint?
This is why you're stupid.
Yes. Yes, I will.
100% バカだろ。
Hey, it's not stupid if it works. I'm going to need a lot of flow improver. And airbrush thinner.
Squishy. Squishy, squishy, squishy.
This stuff is so nasty and chunky. I had to thin and then mix and then thin and then mix some more to get it to the right consistency. But I mean, it kind of works. Now the pigment density on this is absolute trash, so I had to do several coats to get a nice even coverage. But it worked. Now for the highlight color though, I didn't want to have to do so many layers and risk blowing out my undercoat. So I decided to make my own mix using dark golden brown and dark warm flesh. I know that this mix of pro acrylic paints will do the job, flow through the airbrush nicely, and not take a million coats to get to opacity. As usual with pro acrylic, I was not disappointed. Got a nice highlight color on the raised surfaces. Once the paint was dry, I masked off the legs to preserve my work while I airbrushed the upper part of the mech. Masking is the slowest part about airbrushing, to be honest with you. For a single miniature, it might have been better just using a brush. So I airbrushed the shadow tone for the blue, deep azure. This I sprayed all over the model everywhere that I did not mask off. Subsequent layers will be done with a zenithal highlight where I'm going to be doing it from above. So first level of highlight, I'm using Neptune Glow, and I'm spraying from about a 45-degree angle from above. I'm preserving the previous layer as a shadow color. I then taped over everything but the shoulder pads. This was totally a waste of time. I should have used a brush. Live and learn. I then coated the shoulder pads in dark jade, and then I highlighted with regular jade. Alright, after the airbrush steps, here's how we're looking. Not a bad start. We still have some shadow colors and some highlights, but we need to punch it up a bit. It's still looking a little bit flat. I also need to decide where to add the pink. I'll be using most of the pink triad from Warpaint's Fanatic. Just using some layering should get me the gradient I'm looking for. I figure I would paint the pink on the PPC and the LRM. And in my brain, this thing was already looking like an Arizona iced tea, so I was thinking maybe some cherry blossoms up and down the shoulder pads. I also figured I'd do a gemstone style cockpit and a color fade to mark the front facing of the battle mech. I set up my palette and worked my way through the color triad from dark to light. Now, Warpaint Fanatic generally has pretty good coverage, but pinks are just not the best, regardless of what range they're in. It took a bit of work to get to full opacity here. If you're struggling with coverage on a paint and you need to do many layers to build that up, it's very important that you wait for the previous layers to dry. Otherwise, you can risk smearing, tearing, or clumping up the previous layers. I then progressively added in lighter colors in the triad and continued blending the weapons. Because I have a tendency to under-highlight, I made sure to push these as far as I could. Here's a bit of a montage of the process. Once I was finally satisfied with the pink, it was time to move on to the blue. Working in a similar triad as before, but I'm starting brighter this time because I already began with my airbrush. Again here, I'm just taking my time. Edge highlighting is not a process that you want to rush. It's the perfect opportunity just to put on a podcast, listen to some music, get really zen with the whole thing. I don't know about you guys, but there's usually a time in the middle of edge highlighting where I just feel like, why don't I just dry brush this whole thing? And then another voice in the back of my head says, that's gonna look like crap. You know, but how crap? Like if I just slap shop some battle mechs, are they gonna look all right? Am I wasting my time here? Those of you who might be veterans at painting Battletech, how do you guys paint your mechs? All right, here's my blue. Next, it was time to work on the browns. I decided to use dark golden brown, and dark warm flesh for my highlight colors. Time for a little more hydration on my palette. It's been really dry up here during the winter this year. When I edge highlight, I take a minute to mix up a few different tones. One is a darker color for edge highlighting things that are in the shadow. Another is for kind of mid-tones, and then our highest highlight. Even deep in the shadow on a model like this, I think it's important to define those edges. And this is especially important at such a small scale. And again here, I'm pushing myself to go higher and higher on the highlights. Keep in mind with acrylic paints, before they dry, they're going to be brighter than they will be on the finished model. All right, feeling pretty good. Even more depth will be added by the oil wash later. I went ahead and used my Vallejo metal color aluminum to do all the metals on the model. With this, I painted all the metal on the PPC. I painted the vents on the back of the torso. And I painted all the joints all over the model. Alright, looking at the card, I still feel like I'm a little too dark on the green shoulder pads. I used some bright jade and some white blue. And I used these colors to make the shoulder pads more closely match the card. Alright, that looks a lot closer. Alright, time for some freehanding. For the cherry branches, I used warm brown and black brown. Trees being an organic shape, I didn't try to overthink this. For this, I just kind of eyeballed it. I let my brush flow where it felt right. Sorry about the camera focus here, I was a little more focused on my focus than the camera's focus. I didn't worry too much about making this perfect. I mean, trees aren't perfect anyways. And the blossoms will cover up many sins. For the cherry blossoms, I dipped back into the Warpaint's Fanatic Pink Triad. And I just kind of stippled all over the branches. Lots of little spaced out dots. It's kind of hard to be random, our brains are always wanting to make patterns. But I did my best. Then I went one step up on the triad and repeated the process with a lighter color. I was careful not to cover up the previous layer completely. I continued this process on both shoulder pads, eventually building up to the brightest pink on this triad. It's not perfect, but it looks good from a tabletop distance. I used the same paints to paint the cockpit, and then I carefully lined the struts back in. There's something about this step that I find both simultaneously tedious but also satisfying. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that I saved this for one of the last steps. I slapped some Vallejo earth texture on the base. Like the previous mech, I just kind of slapped this around. Only have to be careful around the feet. Then you just wait for it to dry. I went back and rimmed the base in coal black. Because black is the color I most often see on Battletech rims. Now the front facing, I went in with the white blue and I just kind of pre-coated this. So this time I'm going to use my airbrush for the color fade on the front. In order for the pink to be truly vibrant, it needs that step. I masked him off with some silly putty and Tamiya tape, gave him a nice base coat, and used my airbrush to give a couple stages of color fade. Make sure to cover a slightly smaller part of the model with each step. I also had to turn down the pressure on my air compressor, because with each successive layer I had to get closer and closer to the model. That's how an airbrush works, the closer you are, the smaller your lines. But the higher your air pressure, the more likely the paint's going to run. The lightest step I got to was Pale Pink by Pro Acryl. Because of how close I had to get, I practiced on the silly putty first. Takes a delicate touch to make sure I didn't ruin my work. And then before I could pull off the painter's tape and the silly putty, I had to wait and make sure everything was fully dry. The silly putty is amazing for masking. It sticks to itself but not to your model, and when you peel it off, it won't peel off any layers of paint. I think this color fade turned out pretty good, and definitely a lot easier than all the blending I would have had to do with a brush. Next up, I just have to varnish him and do an oil wash like I did with my other mech. I could leave him like this, but that's a bit too pretty. Just a quick coat with some high gloss varnish. Now he's all glossed up and dried and ready to go. I did the oil wash just the same as the previous mech, but I did use some burnt umber for shading on the legs. I avoided using any of this brown tone on the blue or the green or pink parts of the mech, just on the legs and base. For the lighter colored parts of the mech, I stuck with the black. I wanted to preserve the mostly bright colors, and I figured that most of the dirt would accumulate on the lower part of the mech anyways. So this brown black I slapped all over the legs and the base. Remember, oil wash is a reductive process, so a lot of this is going to get removed during cleanup. Alright, a couple hours later, oil wash is all dry. To be honest, he looks pretty good like this, but he'll look even better after cleanup. First starting with just the dry makeup sponge. And then anywhere where I want to get even more off, I add a little bit of mineral spirits to the end of the sponge. Alright, this guy I'm calling done. He's all cleaned up. This whole process was super fun. Here you can see him next to the other mech. I don't think I would have chosen either of these color schemes on my own, but after going through the process, I really liked both of these.
Both of these nuts.
I'm going to finish painting up at least a lance of each. And clearly my daughter has dibs on Cupcake. Alright, let's see some glamour shots. Here we have the Wolverine color scheme 107. What do you guys think? Would you have done this scheme any differently? What faction would you make this guy? Would it be Inner Sphere or Clan? Word of Blake? Also, what do you guys think of random color schemes? Would you be brave enough to do this? Someone said he's giving Optimus Prime vibes. Alright, so that's enough of Fruit Ball here. Let's take a look at Cupcake. I thought this initial draw was pretty hilarious. I knew that something like this could happen, drawing card 381 with these cupcakes on it, and having to find a way to make it into a battle mech. Someone said Cupcake here is giving trans pride vibes. Somebody else said Arizona iced tea, which I immediately saw. What faction would you make this mech? Karita or Draconis combined? Clan Sea Fox? Thanks for watching.
This is why you're stupid.